Hello and welcome to Oak Island Theories. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the priceless religious artifacts that some believe lie at the bottom of the money pit.
Some believe that the poor fellow soldiers of Jesus Christ, the early Knights Templar, discovered a secret chamber in the ruins of Solomon's Temple underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Inside that chamber, some maintain, was the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is the chest said to carry the stone tablets on which Moses inscribed the 10 Commandments, the staff belonging to Aaron, the brother of Moses, and a jar of manna, the food which fell from heaven to sustain the Israelites during the Exodus while they wandered in the Sinai desert, as described in the Hebrew Torah. According to the book of Exodus, about 3 months after the Israelites were liberated from slavery in Egypt, God summoned Moses to the top of Mount Sinai, a mountain in the Sinai desert. There, God spoke to Moses, giving him a number of instructions which he was to pass on to the Israelites. The first set of instructions were the 10 Commandments. The rest were a number of stipulations concerning rituals and daily living. When Moses presented the instructions to the Israelites, they agreed to follow them. In order to seal this covenant between God and the Israelites, God once again summoned Moses to the peak of Mount Sinai, where he stayed for 40 days and 40 nights. During this time, Moses inscribed the new law, which came to be known as the Law of Moses, on stone tablets. He received divine instructions on how to create a chest, an Ark of the Covenant, in which to keep these tablets of the law, along with Aaron's staff and a jar full of manna. The ark was to be crafted from acacia wood and covered inside and out with pure gold. Its lid, which was also to be made of pure gold, was to depict 2 cherubim, or angels, with their wings spread out over the top of the chest. While out in the open, the ark was to be reverently covered by a layer of porpoise skin and an outer layer of blue cloth. It was to be housed in a special tent called the tabernacle, which only Levite priests were allowed to enter. The Israelites built the ark as instructed and carried it with them for 40 years while they wandered throughout the Sinai desert. When at last they came to the Promised Land, Moses instructed them to seize the region by conquest. Their battle commander was to be his assistant, Joshua. Joshua's first act as commander was to attack the walled Canaanite city of Jericho. On God's instruction, he ordered the Israelite army to march around the town once a day. The priests in the procession were to carry the Ark of the Covenant on poles made from acacia wood. The Israelites did this every day for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priests blew ram horns, every soldier in the Israelite army gave a loud cry, and the walls of Jericho fell. The Israelite army charged into the city and slaughtered its residents in accordance with the divine law of Herem. Bolstered by their victory, the Israelites decided to carry the Ark into another battle, this time against the Philistines. They were soundly defeated, however, and the Ark was captured. The Philistines, upon bringing the Ark into their cities, were immediately plagued by hemorrhoids, mice, and boils. Deducing that the misfortunes they suffered were directly related to the Ark, the Philistines returned it to the Israelites. At Beth Shemesh, the Israeli city to which the Philistines returned the Ark's lid was removed by curious Israelites, and 70 men looked inside. Each of the 70 died instantly. In the mid-10th century BC, Solomon, the king of Israel, decided to build a massive temple in Jerusalem in which to house the Ark. King Solomon was the 3rd king of the United Kingdom of Israel, being the son of King David, the 2nd Israeli king, and the successor of King Saul, who famously slew the giant Philistine warrior Goliath with a sling. Solomon was fabulously wealthy, and was considered to be an exceptionally wise and just ruler. He is also considered to be a major prophet in both Judaism and Islam. Perhaps the most famous story involving King Solomon is the Judgment of Solomon, a story in which 2 women approached the wise king with a baby. Both women claimed to be the baby's mother, and hoped Solomon would settle their dispute. The king declared that the baby would be cut in 2, and that each of the women would receive a half. Upon hearing this, one of the women immediately renounced her claim, so that the child might live. From this, Solomon concluded that this woman was the baby's true mother and gave her possession of the whole living child. When Solomon's temple was built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the Ark of the Covenant was placed inside it in an inner sanctuary called the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest was allowed to enter this sanctuary, and only on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, after ritually cleansing himself. In 587 BC, Jerusalem was sacked by the Babylonian armies of Nebuchadnezzar II, and the Temple of Solomon was destroyed. Although the Babylonians kept meticulous records of their plunder, they never mentioned the Ark of the Covenant as being among their booty. Ever since, the location of the Ark has been in dispute. Some claim that the Babylonians did carry the Ark off to Babylon, despite a lack of documentation, and that it was since lost to history. Others maintain that the Ark had already been carried off to Ethiopia 500 years earlier, in the days of King Solomon, by Menelik I. According to Ethiopian scripture, Menelik was the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, an Ethiopian queen who had visited Jerusalem in antiquity, and with whom Solomon, by all accounts, was greatly enamored. According to Ethiopian tradition, Menelik was the first of a long patrilineal line known as the House of Solomon, whose firstborn male members have ruled Ethiopia for millennia. The last of this royal line was the late Emperor Haile Selassie I, who was worshipped as the returned Messiah by Rastafarians. This particular claim that the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Ethiopia is held by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the largest Oriental Orthodox Christian church in the world. In each Ethiopian Orthodox church is a replica ark, called a tablet, which is held within a symbolic Holy of Holies. In the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia, is an ancient artifact which the Ethiopian Church claims is the authentic Ark of the Covenant. The Lemba people of South Africa claim that they too are in possession of the true Ark of the Covenant, or perhaps a replica of it. They believe that they are descendants of the Israelites, perhaps one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, which were exiled from the Holy Land following the Assyrian conquest of 722 BC, and that their ancestors carried the Ark of the Covenant with them into Africa. Lemba tradition tells of a sacred drum called the Ngoma Lungundu, or the voice of God, which ancient Lemba people carried with them on a great migration south. The drum was carried on poles by priests, was never allowed to touch the ground, and could not be looked at. The Ngoma Lungundu was sometimes used as a weapon and could dispatch large amounts of enemies at the same time. On one unfortunate occasion, the wind blew the drum to the ground, and it exploded, killing many. An artifact believed by some to be a remnant of the Ngoma Lungundu is on display at the Zimbabwe Museum of Human Sciences in Harare, Zimbabwe. Interestingly, genetic studies suggest that the Lemba people might be able to trace their ancestry back to the Levant. The Book of Maccabees asserts that the prophet Jeremiah, upon being warned by God of the impending Babylonian invasion, brought both the ark and the tabernacle to Mount Nebo, where he buried them in a cave. Jeremiah claimed that the ark would remain hidden, quote, until the time that God should gather his people again together and receive them unto mercy, unquote. Some believe that the Ark of the Covenant remained hidden in a secret chamber in Solomon's temple, and that it was discovered in the Middle Ages by the Knights Templar. According to legend, the Templars brought the Ark into Accra, then to Cyprus, and later into France. Some proponents of this theory argue that when the Templars were disbanded in 1307, a number of them escaped persecution and brought the Ark with them to Scotland. Later, following the old Viking routes pioneered by Leif Erikson, the Templars shipped the Ark across the Atlantic and buried it, possibly on Oak Island. Another of the sacred religious artifacts said to have been in the possession of the Knights Templar is a weapon known as the Holy Lance. According to the Gospel of St. John, the Jewish priests and scribes who had convinced Pontius Pilate to crucify Jesus on Good Friday were adamant that no bodies should remain upon the cross the following day, which was the second Sabbath of Passover week. In order to appease these Jewish authorities, Pilate ordered that the legs of the crucified should be broken so as to hasten their passing. The Roman soldier tasked with this duty broke the legs of one of the criminals who had been crucified beside Jesus. When the soldier came to Jesus, however, he saw that he was already dead. Instead of breaking his legs, he thrust a spear into his side to verify that he was indeed dead, and immediately blood and water poured forth. Christian tradition identifies this Roman soldier who pierced Jesus' side as a centurion from the Gospel of St. Matthew, who, upon witnessing the terrifying miracles which immediately followed Jesus' death, exclaimed, "Truly this was the Son of God." According to legend, this centurion, whose name was Longinus, converted to Christianity and was eventually executed for his beliefs. Today, Saint Longinus is venerated as a martyr in the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. According to legend, upon touching the blood of Christ, the ordinary spear which Longinus used to pierce Jesus' side was immediately transformed into a weapon of extraordinary power, a holy lance. In the first few centuries following the crucifixion, the lance remained in the possession of the early Christians. Then, in the 3rd century, it wound up in the hands of a Roman legate named Maurice. Maurice, a native of Thebes, Egypt, was a devout Christian and the commander of the Theban Legion, a legendary all-Christian Roman legion. In 287 AD, the Roman Emperor Maximian ordered the Theban Legion to march to Gaul, present-day France, to suppress an uprising of Burgundian peasants. Upon arriving in Gaul, however, Maurice and the Theban Legion discovered that the revolt had already been crushed, and that the Gallic peasants who had revolted were fellow Christian converts. Maurice and the Theban Legion met with the emperor himself at what is now St. Maurice, Switzerland. There, the emperor demanded that the legionaries venerate him as a living god. The Theban Legion, which was Christian to a man, refused. As punishment, Emperor Maximian ordered a decimation, in which every 10th man was beheaded. The emperor then made further demands on the legionaries which would force them to act against their Christian faith. Encouraged by Maurice's fervor, the legionaries refused the emperor, and again Maximian ordered a decimation. The process was repeated until, in the end, all 6,666 men of the Theban Legion, including Maurice, were martyred. Centuries later, during the medieval period, Maurice was venerated by the Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, and Coptic Orthodox churches as the patron saint of knights and crusaders. Legend has it that, upon Maurice's execution, the Holy Lance was picked up by Emperor Maximian. After years of successful campaigning in Iberia, present-day Spain, and Mauritania, northwest Africa, with the lance by his side, Maximian was forced to retire. Although his title of Caesar, which he shared with co-emperor Diocletian, was passed down to the up-and-coming co-emperors Galerius and Severus, Maximian gave the Holy Lance to his son, Maxentius. In the years following Maximian and Diocletian's retirement, the Roman Empire plunged into civil war, involving 6 different self-proclaimed emperors. Eventually, one emperor came out on top. This was Constantine, who was later given the epithet Constantine the Great. Constantine came into power 19 years after St. Maurice's death. After fighting civil wars against rival emperors Maxentius and Licinius I, he brought unity to the divided Roman Empire. Instead of taking up residence in Rome, as all previous Roman emperors had done, he moved his imperial residence to the city of Byzantium, a place he termed a Nova Roma, or New Rome. He renamed the city Constantinople after himself. In centuries to come, Constantinople would go on to survive the 5th century fall of the Western Roman Empire and continue as the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. Before Constantine, Christians in the Roman Empire had suffered a long history of persecution. In 312 AD, however, Constantine became the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. In 313, he issued the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity in the Roman Empire, effectively putting an end to the persecutions. The story of Constantine's dramatic conversion was documented by Roman historians Eusebius and Lactantius. According to the tale, while campaigning against rival emperor Maxentius, Constantine looked into the sun and had a vision. Above the sun, he saw a kiro, a symbol used by early Christians, accompanied by the Greek words "en tauto nika," or "in this sign conquer." Later, on the eve of October 27, 312 AD, Constantine had a dream in which Christ explained to him that he should use the sign against his enemies. That night, he embraced Christianity, and the following morning, he defeated Maximian's army at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Later, Constantine developed a unique battle standard called the Labarum, which depicted the hero he had seen in his vision. Some believe that, during the Battle of Milvian Bridge, Constantine looted the Holy Lance from the corpse of Maxentius, who had inherited it from his father Maximian. Aided by the power of the Holy Lance and the Hero Labarum, Constantine went on to defeat all his enemies and reunify the fractured Roman Empire. During his reign, Constantine legalized Christianity and put a stop to Christian persecution. In the province of Syria, in the city of Jerusalem, he had the Church of the Holy Sepulchre built upon both Golgotha, also known as Calvary, the site where Jesus was crucified, and the Potter's Field in which Jesus was believed to have been buried. Constantine's mother, Helena, was also a devout convert to Christianity. In 326, she undertook a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the hopes of locating Christian relics. There, she purportedly recovered a piece of the true cross on which Christ was crucified. Years later, this relic would wind up in the hands of the Christian Crusaders, who would bring it with them into battle. During the Battle of the Horns of Hattin, the relic was captured by Sultan Salah ad-Din's Ayyubid army. According to legend, Helena also recovered nails from the crucifixion and brought them from the Holy Land to Constantinople. She set them in Constantine's armor and weapons, one of which was the Holy Lance. In the 5th century, barbarian Germanic tribes such as the Goths, Vandals, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes flooded west into Roman territory, many of them having been displaced by the Huns of Central Asia, who were also moving west. Due in part to these massive invasions, and in part to civil war, plague, and economic depression, the great Western Roman Empire, which had dominated the Mediterranean and beyond since the days of Julius Caesar, collapsed. Roman cities were pillaged and looted, their treasures changing hands time and time again. Various tribes fought against one another, scrambling to fill the power vacuum that ensued, and thus the Dark Ages began. By the 8th century, one man succeeded in reuniting most of Western Europe. This man, a Frankish king known as Charlemagne, was named the first Holy Roman Emperor. In this way, he was the first man to hold the title of emperor in Western Europe since the fall of Rome. According to legend, Charlemagne owed much of his success to his possession of the Holy Lance. Indeed, the Holy Lance became one of the most important imperial regalia of the Holy Roman Empire, along with the imperial crown and the imperial sword, both of which currently reside in the imperial treasury at the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, Austria. Up to this point, it appears that the Holy Lance, at least according to legend, can be traced in an unbroken line all the way back to Saint Longinus. However, during the First Crusade, a turn of events threw the legends of the Holy Roman Empire's lance into question. In the summer of 1098, after an 8-month siege, French crusaders captured the ancient city of Antioch. In an ironic turn of events, the besiegers soon found themselves besieged by a Muslim army from Mosul, which had come to relieve the original Islamic Antioch defenders. The trapped crusaders prayed for a miracle, and found one in the form of Peter Bartholomew, a lowly priest from southern France. Bartholomew claimed to have had a vision of Saint Andrew, who told him that the Holy Lance was located somewhere within the city, and that it would help the Crusaders repel their Muslim besiegers. Bolstered by this news, some of the Crusaders began to excavate a chapel, where they discovered a spear. Although some were skeptical, believing that Bartholomew had planted it, others believed that the spear was truly the Holy Lance, and took its discovery as a sign that they would survive the siege. After fasting for a number of days, the Crusaders emerged from the city gate with one of their number brandishing the Holy Lance. Though half-starved, the Crusaders forced the incredulous Muslim besiegers into a panicked retreat. According to one legend, the Holy Lance from the Siege of Antioch, throughout the course of the Crusades, eventually made its way into Templar hands, and was one of the treasures smuggled out of France years later, when the Knights Templar was disbanded. The apparent existence of the Antioch Lance raises a number of questions. Was either the Antioch Lance or the Lance of the Holy Roman Empire the true spear of Longinus? If the former was the true spear, how did it come to be buried in a Christian church in the ancient city of Antioch? If the latter was the true spear, what is the explanation behind the Antioch Lance? Is it possible that it was interred in the Aleppo church by Helena, the mother of Constantine, during her time in the Holy Land? Whatever the case, throughout the years following the Crusades, many have been convinced that the Holy Lance of the Holy Roman Empire was the true Spear of Longinus. In the 1400s, it found its way to Nuremberg, where it was locked in a silver chest and suspended from the rafters of the Church of the Holy Ghost. Pilgrims from all over Europe flocked to Nuremberg to venerate the relic. In the early 19th century, during the Napoleonic Wars, the French dictator Napoleon Bonaparte sought to claim the Holy Lance as a spoil of war. After the 1805 Battle of Austerlitz, it seemed as if his desire might be realized. However, unbeknownst to Napoleon, the residents of Nuremberg had relocated the lance to Vienna, just out of Napoleon's reach, back in 1796. In 1938, the Third Reich under Adolf Hitler invaded Austria. Hitler was obsessed with acquiring German relics, including relics of the Holy Roman Empire, which he considered the First Reich, and was thrilled when he came into the possession of the Holy Lance. He returned the lance to Nuremberg, where he put it on display. In 1945, at the end of World War II, the lance came into the possession of the American Army, which returned it to Vienna. In 2003, the spear in Vienna underwent a number of tests by English metallurgist Dr. Robert Feather. Interestingly, Feather concluded that the spearhead was likely forged during the 7th century AD. This find gives rise to several intriguing possibilities. Perhaps the royal spear of the Holy Roman Empire, one of the empire's 3 imperial regalia, was simply a relic of the Dark Ages. Perhaps a true Holy Lance was the one discovered during the Siege of Antioch, which, according to legend, ended up in the hands of the Templars. If this is true, some say the Holy Lance may now be lying somewhere beneath Oak Island. Perhaps one of the most famous treasures associated with the Knights Templar is the Holy Grail. This artifact, in the context of the Knights Templar, is the holy chalice which Jesus used to serve the wine during the Last Supper. According to legend, Joseph of Arimathea, an early disciple of Christ who interred the body of Jesus in the tomb which had been initially prepared for himself, used the chalice to catch the blood of Christ after Jesus' body was taken down from the cross. In doing so, Joseph transformed the already holy chalice into a doubly holy relic, which would provide its finder with immortality and enlightenment. The supposed history of the Holy Grail is a colorful tapestry woven from medieval myth and Dark Age pseudo-history. Legend has it that, upon Jesus' death, Joseph of Arimathea was visited by the Archangel Raphael. Raphael instructed Joseph to ship the Grail across the Mediterranean Sea, through the Pillars of Hercules, up the Iberian and Gallic coasts, and across the Channel to the recently Romanized Isle of Britannia, present-day Britain. Joseph did as instructed and disembarked on British shores at the site of Wirial Hill. He traveled to another nearby hill surrounded by marshlands, which the local Celts called Ennis Wydrin, or the Isle of Glass. This hill is known today as Glastonbury Tor. There, Joseph and his companions buried the Grail beneath a spring sacred to the local Druids, which was located at the hill's foot. As soon as they had buried it, the spring water turned blood red. This spring, known today as Chalicewell Spring, issues blood-hued water stained with hematite to this very day. According to medieval lore, the Grail was recovered from Glastonbury Tor by a monarch known as the Fisher King, who brought the relic to his castle, Corbinick. Sometime later, it was coveted by another British king, the famous King Arthur. King Arthur is arguably best known today for being the protagonist of the Arthurian Legend, a body of fantastical medieval stories, poems, and romances revolving around the legendary court of Camelot and the Knights of the Round Table. However, some historians argue that the Arthurian legend is rooted in fact, and that the legendary King Arthur was based on a real 5th century Romano-British warlord who, along with local Briton leaders, fought against invading Saxon migrants during the post-Roman period. Some of these historians maintain that the town of Camulodunum, present-day Colchester, Essex, the first capital of the Roman province of Britannia, was the etymological root of the Camelot of medieval Arthurian literature. In the Arthurian legend, as narrated by various medieval writers and poets, King Arthur sent the 12 Knights of the Round Table on a quest to search for the Holy Grail. Of those 12, only 3 came close to realizing their mission. These knights were Sir Percival, Sir Galahad, and Sir Bors. On their quest, these 3 knights went through many trials and tribulations, which ultimately led them to Corbinic, the castle of the Fisher King. When the 3 knights came to Corbinic, they learned that the Fisher King suffered from a debilitating wound to the groin, and that he was unable to sire an heir. To add insult to injury, his kingdom was a barren wasteland. Both the king and his kingdom were doomed to remain barren until a pure and worthy knight would come to claim the Holy Grail. Fortunately for the Fisher King, the 3 knights fit the bill. They retrieved the Grail, healing the king and his kingdom in the process, and brought it back to King Arthur. At the end of the Arthurian tale, King Arthur was betrayed by his illegitimate son Mordred. The father and son engaged in a duel during the Battle of Camlan, which culminated in both of them being mortally wounded. Although Mordred died on the battlefield, King Arthur was brought to the legendary Isle of Avalon, where he resides indefinitely, sustained by the Grail. Legend has it that King Arthur sleeps in Avalon, and will return again one day to lead the British people in their hour of greatest need. Some say that, during the Middle Ages, possibly following the 11th century Norman conquest of England, or perhaps during the reign of the Plantagenets, a dynasty of French-speaking English kings, the Holy Grail was brought to France. Eventually it found its way into the possession of the Cathars. The Cathars were adherents of a Gnostic Christian sect which flourished in southern France between the 12th and 14th centuries. According to legend, they kept the Grail in their nigh impregnable fortress Château de Montségur, located on a mountain in the Languedoc region of southern France in the French Pyrenees. In the mid-12th century, the Catholic Church denounced the Cathar doctrine, which it deemed heretical. The Church was particularly opposed to the Cathari sacrament of consolamentum, a baptism in which Cathar practitioners attained the status of perfect. Initially, the Church attempted to suppress Catharism through conversion. Some of the missionaries sent to Languedoc include Bernard de Clairvaux, patron of the Knights Templar, and Saint Dominic, the founder of the Dominican order. When the missionaries met with little success, the Church decided to suppress the heretical sect via a crusade. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched a crusade against the Cathars, which has come to be known as the Albigensian Crusade. That year, roughly 10,000 northern French crusaders gathered in the city of Lyon before marching south into Cathar territory. On July 22nd, they sacked the Cathar city of Béziers and massacred its inhabitants. They carried on, taking the towns of Carcassonne and Astour. After a bloody 20-year campaign, the Crusaders finally suppressed the Cathar faith in most of southern France. However, one last bastion of Catharism remained, the mountaintop Château de Montségur. On May 1243, an army of 10,000 French troops besieged the Cathar fortress of Montségur, which had become the seat and head of the Cathar Church during the Albigensian Crusade. After 9 months, the Crusaders gave the Cathar defenders an ultimatum. Those who renounced their faith and converted to Roman Catholicism were allowed to leave the castle unscathed. The rest would be burnt at the stake as heretics. Although many of the defenders favored the first option, about 200 chose martyrdom. Most of these were so-called perfecti, ascetic Cathar monks who abstained from all worldly pleasures. These 200 did not wait for the Crusaders to storm the castle. Instead, they left the castle on their own accord, descended the mountain, and climbed up onto the wooden pyres that had been erected for them. All 200 were burnt alive. According to legend, in the days prior to the Montségur massacre, a handful of Cathar perfecti smuggled the Holy Grail out of the castle and down the side of the mountain through the use of pulleys. The perfecti hid the treasures in one of the area's many caves, leaving clues as to its whereabouts by carving symbols into various cave walls. Some say that the Grail was later recovered by the Knights Templar, which also had a strong presence in the Languedoc area, and that it made its way onto the Templar galleys which left the port of La Rochelle on October 13, 1307. According to some, it eventually made its way to Oak Island.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support this channel, please check out the Oak Island Encyclopedia by clicking the link in the description.